Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and I'm also a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over the types of women that actually prefer introverted men and find those men attractive. This was requested, and I think it's actually very interesting because I made a video earlier regarding do women overall prefer extroverted men or introverted men? And the results based on the research, and it was in the description box, was that overall women prefer men who have a combination of both, with the ability to be extroverted in certain social situations and introverted when more family oriented situations. And you can look at that video if you want, but that's a summary of it. And the details of that video was based on research, but that doesn't really show if there are different types of women and what they tend to prefer, even though that's very much the reality, right? Even though that's the average, that women prefer a mixture of both with more extroverted characteristics at some point, introverted at the other points. There are some women who overall prefer introverted men, and you guys were curious about who are these women. And so I've collected some of those aspects based on some research, and we're going to talk about it. The first one is the one that shows up the most in research, which is why I put it first, but I think it's also the one that's like most obvious. It is that women who prefer men who are similar to their own. And so she is introverted, and so she'll prefer those as well. And basically the research shows that people in general tend to choose partners that they feel are similar to themselves. However, there is one caveat to this. Some people, when they have more lower self-esteem or trauma, they prefer people who are not like themselves because they don't like themselves. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later after this point, because I feel like that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important. So let's first talk about women who prefer people who have similar personalities to themselves. Research shows that individuals look for partners who resemble their own personality dimensions, okay? Including introverted versus extroverted, agreeableness, emotional stability, etc., right? Which means statistically, based on this research and a couple others, introverted women statistically are more likely to prefer introverted partners because they share the similar comforts that these women perceive and prefer for themselves. And examples could be a quieter social style as well as some similar decompression needs beyond not just socializing, but other aspects of life as well, because it does seem that introversion can also translate in other parts of their life. Perhaps they need a little bit more downtime even after activities. There was one research that did allude to that, but I can't speak much on that. But the consistent pattern is that the matching pattern in social psychology, clinical psychology, and psychology across the board is that people who form relationships, long-term stable relationships, overall they tend to have similar personalities. And from a dating perspective, introverted women prefer and find introverted men more attractive typically, okay? And the caveat I was talking about earlier, how there are some people who are insecure about themselves, and so they prefer someone who's not like them because they don't like themselves. And sometimes I think what starts happening with a lot of men who are introverted or women who are introverted, they prefer a person who's extroverted because they don't like the fact that they're introverted. So a part of them feels like if they can get somebody who's extroverted, this proves to them that they are desirable and likable and that they are like other people. So sometimes you can run into that. It's just something to keep in mind. It's not going to be common with people who have higher self-esteem. The next one is women who tend to value deep or reflective communication. This doesn't have to be someone who's introverted. And also, not all introverted people are deep and reflective, but it does seem to have some correlation, which is why women who prefer deep and reflective communication styles and connection tend to prefer introverted men. This could be an extroverted woman, though, so an extroverted woman. So that's important. Studies of personality and dating preferences show that traits like agreeableness and emotional stability are linked to overall attractiveness across the board. Men and women, extrovert, introvert alike. So that's one thing to keep in mind. However, on top of that, women who prefer deep and reflective communication do tend to prefer more introverted men, and they actually find it more appealing and value this overall comparison to men who are more socially dominant, to which they might use more direct means to attract people, right? They might not be very consistent, but they might be able to give flowers if they do something wrong. Even some of these men, even if they make terrible mistakes in relationships like cheating and things like that, some women as long as he can pay for certain gifts, as long as he can apologize, they're okay with that. But those women tend to not value deep and reflective communication and deep reflective relationships. And some of them actually struggle with self-esteem. However, women who prefer more depth in communication, they might not want that, but they're probably going to prefer more consistent conversations, maybe more consistent dates, and they probably have a little bit higher standards to certain regards. So they obviously don't want to be cheated on. So things like that might be something to keep in mind with women like this, but it is something that research does show. The next one is similar to what we were talking about, but it's a little bit more of a blanket statement. Women who prefer less social dominance of themselves and men in general definitely prefer introverted men. Some research shows female attraction actually does prefer aggressive dominance, but that alone isn't the overall factor of partner preference. And so each women, just as with men, they have different ranges and percentages of what they want in a partner, or what they ideally want, or what they need for their own personality. And so some women want more warmth and pro-social traits. Actually, that one's more common for long-term relationships than someone who's just assertive and aggressive socially. And so interesting enough, it seems that women who are more commitment forward actually tend to prefer men who are introverted to some extent, because they feel like they can emotionally engage, which they find attractive. Introverts tend to have these traits, not because of the introversion itself, but more so because they tend to foster attentive listening to some extent. Women perceive it like that. Might not be true, but some women perceive introverted men more thoughtful and attentive, and they find that attractive. And so they actually prefer the guy who's less socially dominant and he's more mysterious or more warm or kind, or some of them might perceive this as more musically inclined, and women do tend to prefer musically inclined men, which we've talked about on this channel before. And so sometimes it can be from that angle as well. And the next one is women who appreciate thoughtfulness and authenticity, right? Some research sources, some of them are actually academic work, and then some of them are research. So they're both research, but one might not be necessarily peer reviewed yet. It does show relationship preferences do tend to prefer strengths that they feel is more common with introverted men, which is thoughtful listening and empathy. So she feels like he's actually listening, not necessarily just pretending, right? She feels like his emotional depth is authentic. She also feels like men like this are more independent and honest. And so that's very interesting, because I think that there's a lot of truth to that. It doesn't necessarily mean all introverted men are like that, but I do think a lot of women perceive it like that. And so that gives introverted men the leg up. They seem to have a more benefit in terms of dating women who are like this. The next one is a lot of women think introverted men are more patient and understanding. And they also find that women who are patient and understanding prefer men like this as well, because she feels like it's a two-way street. And to be honest, if you are an introverted man, you might prefer someone who's like this, and it sounds like the preference is the other way as well, because you might need some alone time to recharge, and she might need to not take that personally. And so women who are more patient and understanding, and also want men who are patient and understanding, do prefer introverted men. The next one is women who are more empathetic and compassionate, rather than a woman who really wants a more loud and obvious type of love. These types of women prefer introverted men. They enjoy supporting their partner, and they enjoy being supported emotionally by their partner. And they might actually prefer men who are more reserved because of that. So I hope this video was helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.